Okay, hi everyone, it's Matthew here.
Elliot.
And today with this video, we hope to be a bit of a complement, a bit of a follow-up to the white paper, which so far we released it a couple of weeks ago.
Defining interactive e-commerce.
Defining interactive e-commerce, just to be clear, is the white paper we produced together with Pinduoduo. And it's been quite well received. We're very happy with the feedback we've got so far from it. And so today we just wanted to explore a little bit more of some of the themes that we didn't get a chance to cover so much in the paper. And that sort of leads into the idea that interactive e-commerce and the themes around that are not just China, this is a global trend.
Yeah, to me, the past few months, just writing this paper and then kind of discussing it afterwards has been just a great learning experience. Not only seeing how e-commerce has developed in China, how Pinduoduo was able to rise so quickly and the model of interactive e-commerce along with it, but also how in other areas around the world, particularly in the developing world, how there are similar themes, but also very unique themes as well. How there are some things that are really China only, but in other areas that are very, very universal. So we invited some guests on today to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we've got two guests, one from Bangladesh, one from India, which provide a sort of different viewpoint on some of the, like I say, the themes and the trends we were covering in the paper. And we sort of match these two worlds together and see that, yes, there's a lot that's different, but if we squint hard enough, there's actually some things that are quite similar as well. The sort of human experience of digitalization of the purchase experience is something that there's definitely lessons to be learned and to be covered across various markets.
Right? As they say here in Thailand, it's same, but different. So
Right. So, without further ado, our first guest,
Rezwanul Haque Jami, from the Bangladeshi government, from their ICT bureau, and he is behind EK Shop, which is a really innovative kind of bootstrapped from the ground up by a government ministry within Bangladesh to help the Bangladeshi people and their economy overcome some of these challenges that they face in introducing the digital economy and e-commerce in particular.
Yeah, so his experience was actually, when we did it, we both, after the call, were like, that was just so relevant. It was actually the things he was describing, that the initiatives that they're having on the ground, it seemed to be sort of similar in many ways to the things we covered in the paper for China. But obviously it's localized, they've got their own twist on it, but there's definitely some parallels here to be drawn. So Jami, let's kick off and just say, first of all, thank you for being with us today. And for our audience who don't know so much about you, maybe you introduce yourself and your organization, what you do, and the impact you're having around e-commerce in particular.
Thank you, Matthew. It's a great honor, coming onto your program. My name is Rezwanul Haque Jami. People call me Jami. I head up the e-commerce unit of ICT division of Bangladesh government. So we are part of the ICT ministry, and we run a platform called EK Shop. So which means unified shop, which connects all e-commerce platforms, logistic providers, payment platforms, and deploys a physical network of shops all around the country, providing digital service and providing assisted e-commerce and assisted onboarding of buyers and sellers into the platform. So it's a government together, we call it PPP, public-private initiative.
Yep.
And it's been running for the last 3 years.
Okay. So you guys actually help, your remit, your goal, as it were, is to lower the barriers to partaking in e-commerce, right? To get more people, to make that more accessible for people in Bangladesh.
So in Bangladesh, as you know, we are a developing nation, and our challenges are like any other developing nation. However, Bangladesh has some unique aspects of challenges as well. Connectivity was one of the main challenges that we had. Uh, we are a big country. If you talk about population, we are a nation of 160 million. However, only around 35% of that population lives in the urban areas, and the recent e-commerce growth that we have seen in the last 5 or 6 years uh, happened in the urban and suburban areas. So that massive growth only happened in the urban areas, and the majority of the population who are living in the rural areas are mostly left out of this whole e-commerce revolution. So our core goal is to how to bring them together in bring them in e-commerce, so that as a whole the whole economy can flourish. So that was our core goal. And then we had some other unique challenges as well. Unlike, let's say, China or India, where you see a very strong private sector presence, deep government facilitation on those private sector to grow. In Bangladesh, we don't have, or we did not have, that infrastructure for a private sector growth in e-commerce. So rather than having 1, 2, or 3 big e-commerce players in Bangladesh, the whole market is fragmented into 10 or 15 medium-sized e-commerce players. And that's why, because of that intense competition, that reach out to the rural area or the marginal population did not happen. And that's why the government felt, it had to step in, not as a, let's say, business, but also as a facilitator to bring the private sector together to reach out to the masses.
That's an interesting dynamic there. With there's multiple small to medium-sized players. No one's really dominating that market. That structure. Why is it that kind of structure came about, do you think?
Um, if you look at ease of doing business index, which the World Trade Organization actually manages, and you'll see Bangladesh is actually Bangladesh was struggling in that index for the last I think almost a decade, because of a lot of regulations within the government of getting foreign direct investment coming in. So Bangladesh has opened up. In the at least in the last 5 years, we have seen multiple foreign companies have come into Bangladesh with direct investment. However, not in the e-commerce domain, and the local industry did not flourish into that domain that much in the last decade. What we have seen, let's say 20 years back in China, the emergence of the e-commerce giants, which we are called giants now today. They started pretty small 20 years back. However, the enormous scale that they had over those 20 years, Bangladesh just did not have that. So, for example, if you talk about connectivity 20 years back, we almost didn't have any. So the country progressed on connectivity, internet, openness, and economy, the purchasing power of the middle income group. Everything happened in the last 8 or 9 years. So what happened? More or less, the local entrepreneurs actually came into e-commerce, and the local entrepreneurs did not have a very strong corporate backing. If you look at India, when the local entrepreneurs came into e-commerce, they got a very big investment backing from either a very vibrant, startup funding ecosystem or investment ecosystem, or you have seen, we have seen big conglomerates actually investing into e-commerce. In Bangladesh, that didn't happen. So everything was almost bootstrapped. So all these 10, 15 companies were bootstrapped, very small initiatives originally started, and with the revenues that they earned, went back into investment. The traditional financial market did not come into investment into e-commerce in Bangladesh. Right now, just now, we see the traditional financial institutions are coming into e-commerce, but not before that. And that's why the market developed in that way. If you talk about Southeast Asia even, in countries like Pakistan still has big foreign investments as well as conglomerate investments, corporate investment into e-commerce. In Bangladesh, that didn't happen. We are only seeing that recently. And very interesting comparison is Myanmar as well. So Myanmar opened up late than Bangladesh. If you talk about connectivity, you talk about education on e-commerce, Myanmar started even after us. However, they have learned from like countries like Bangladesh and Nepal and adjoining countries. And so they are taking the policy directives, that enables them to attract much more investment into this domain. So Bangladesh is only doing it right now, and we are building the sort of the infrastructure to do that. So we are creating almost the backbone so that other companies and investment can come in to really scale their e-commerce operations, to a larger extent.
Okay, that's interesting. With the backbone that you just mentioned, so could you explain a little bit more about that? What are you actually referring to there? This sort of combination that you and the public sector are supporting private sector innovation and entrepreneurship. How does that relationship actually play out?
Yeah. Now, it's very interesting in Southeast Asia. Now, you talk about multiple countries. Bangladesh, of course, I talked about connectivity as a challenge. So there are other challenges as well. For example, trust is a very big issue. And when you're talking about a large population, a rural population coming into e-commerce, the trustworthiness of actually ordering something and getting the same thing back is a humongous issue, because they were not digitized before. A lot of the services were not digitized before. So the first thing that the government did is to make people understand the value of digital economy itself. So if you want to apply for your national ID card, your social security number, you should do that online. That saves you time, saves you hassle, much more transparent in every aspect. So we took a very cohesive decision that first the population needs to come into online transaction space. So all the utilities that you paid month in, month out, we should digitize that first. So that creates an era of trust on digital payments. So payment itself was a challenge as well. So Bangladesh is one of the few economies in the world which has a kind of a closed economic loop. So what do I mean by closed economic loop? Of course, FDI is completely open. Bangladeshi companies are going outside. Foreign trade is completely open. However, just to give you an example, a Bangladeshi credit card cannot transact outside of the country. So you can physically use a credit card in Bangladeshi credit card, a Visa or a MasterCard or a JCB or any other Amex card, but usually that card is country locked in. So payment had been a very big issue. Financial inclusion had been a very big issue. So what we did, because the small e-commerce companies did not have that necessary investment to go out to the rural areas, we tried to create a backbone which takes care of payment, trust, as well as the logistics. So all three aspects of it. So what we did, Bangladesh is divided into these 6,000 administrative units, right? We call them unions. So each union has multiple villages under one union. So we have almost 6,000 unions. So what the government did, or my organization did, we started it almost 8 years back. So we started building these digital centers. So a digital center is equipped with a high-speed internet with all the PCs, projectors, and all the equipment, and an entrepreneur. So they are run actually in a decentralized model, almost like a franchisee model, right? So there is one entrepreneur, a male entrepreneur and a female entrepreneur sitting in these digital centers, and people go to these digital centers to avail any kind of government services, applying for passports and whatnot. So what happened is we created that infrastructure as e-commerce ready. So for example, if you want to buy anything online, you go to that digital center and order online, whether you have a smartphone or not, whether you are literate or not, whether you are financially included or not. So for example, I don't have a bank account, I don't have a credit card, I can still go to the digital center, open an account for me, somebody helps me in opening an account, and then I can be financially included there. I can order something online, and everything happens in a single digital center. So it's an assisted e-commerce model that we created. So that is the core backbone that we are talking about. So an unified payment gateway which can cover mobile financial services, regular banking, debit, credit card, and everything. So we created that, connected that with digital center. We created one aggregation platform. So whichever those 15 e-commerce websites, it doesn't matter. You come to the digital center, you go into one single window, which is X shop or EK shop, and you search for search for something, and X shop is connected with all these 15 companies through API. So everybody's offer comes in front of you, and you pick and choose whichever is built through comparison and everything. And you have to mind it that this is a local franchisee we are talking about. So there is an innate trust the local people have, because they are going to a physical center. And what happens once they order once, then because they are now financially included, they now have that app in their phone. The next order they do directly. And so we are bringing more people in through this assisted e-commerce model. So
Sure.
I should say, if you remember the Taobao village model for which initially Alibaba started doing back in the day, to create those manufacturing hubs, right, all across China, to bring their products online. So we kind of did the reverse of it, in Bangladesh. And then our focus was to how to make that Taobao village thing possible in Bangladesh for the rural artisans that are producing things. So that same infrastructure now works in a roundabout way. So for example, if I'm producing something in the village, maybe it's an agricultural product, maybe I'm a farmer, I'm producing rice. So how do I get access to the market? Usually the traditional access to market is through middlemen, right? So here we are trying to break that barrier. So you come to one center, and you open an account into X shop, and what X shop does is it gives you an on-ramping opportunity to access all those 15 other platforms. So you upload your product to X shop once, and it automatically becomes available to all these 15 platforms. So as a consumer, whichever platform the consumer goes to, so be it abc.com or def.com or xyz.com, you don't need to even know about Xshop, because Xshop is the backend platform itself. So if I'm searching for the product, I focus on the product itself. So this is how the whole infrastructure we built. However, starting this year, we are now feeling that the regular process of that search engine, e-commerce is becoming obsolete. So we are turning ourselves, or we are a more experience approach rather than a search engine approach. So we are now trying to build that process in, and we are looking at different models everywhere in the world. We have seen one model in China, kind of a social commerce model that we have seen with this company Pinduoduo. And we seriously looked into that model and how to bring that in Bangladesh. And again, Bangladesh is a little bit different than China, right? So we are currently, if you understand that, for example, in social media in Bangladesh, it's an absolute Facebook monopoly. So everybody who's anybody is online in Facebook. So how to bring that also socially connect with all the social platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and everything is something of a challenge. And how to make that physical infrastructure that we created and bring that into the social domain is something that we are working on right now.
Right, that's super interesting. One of the things that we covered in the paper and that we found through doing the work on an interactive e-commerce model was that, yeah, you're right, the search paradigm of intent-driven e-commerce is actually not driving this this way of this mobile-first e-commerce at all, that it was much more of a recommendation-driven model where the products are recommended to the user based upon their social network, yes, but also just simply through their behavior in the app and what they've engaged with before, in a similar way that we see with content platforms that are mobile first, such as Douyin or TikTok. Yeah, we're having this recommendation driven experience rather than search intent driven experience. That lends itself, that has some pretty big implications for the sort of price point of items that are the sort of types and categories of items that people buy as well on those platforms. Agriculture, as you've just pointed out, there is a really big one and is a big opportunity there for mobile e-commerce, also to digitalize and improve the efficiency of agriculture in general is a huge opportunity that Pinduoduo is quite focused on. It's interesting seeing Bangladesh that you guys also see the same opportunity.
But we as you said, Matthew, but we are coming into this in a slightly different way, and that's pretty interesting as well. I wanted to mention. So our understanding of the demise per se of those that search engine based, e-commerce did not come from the behavioral analysis of what is happening with other relevant platforms or the trends. For us, it's a very straightforward, what should I say, digitization story. When you are talking about a country which skipped some middle phases of connectivity, issues. For example, we jumped from 2G to 4G pretty quickly. If you look at Europe, if you look at even China, how the whole mobile technology space has progressed. So it was a gradual progress, right? In Bangladesh, in some cases, it is a leapfrog because the technology became available, the country became capable financially to avail that technology, things becoming cheaper. So, for example, the gap between 3G and 4G was pretty low. Now, if you look at the traditional e-commerce, how it came online, you'll see that, the standard e-commerce model of getting the search bar on top and then getting a mobile view of that app, still getting that search, just a, excuse me, is just a, what should I say, it's kind of a conversion of an existing web model into a mobile model, right? So our understanding was when we are talking about a country which whose majority of the population is youth. I think 25% of the, I might be wrong, but what we enjoy right now in Bangladesh is called a demographic dividend. So most of our population is youth. So they are coming into digital domain, not through a PC, not through a web browser, but a mobile browser and a mobile phone, right? So their whole approach to technology is different than our approach previously, where we came into digitization through a website, through a laptop and a PC and a standard internet connection. So most of Bangladeshis are actually using mobile internet connection and mobile phones to go online. So a different approach is necessary. And if you say about behavioral analysis, we also felt that how the whole ethnic or culture thing happens. In Bangladesh, during the religious festivities or the holidays, there is this trend of, ban traditional e-commerce does not let you do that. So how that tradition can be brought into this whole buying experience or your consumer experience has been a key deciding factor for us to move towards that.
So that was the end of our first conversation there. And so with Bangladesh, we were looking at, it's quite interesting that there were so many similarities there between what we were talking about and then obviously what happened in China with around Pinduoduo. And in Bangladesh, it seems to be that the government's been really proactive in their programs, right? That there's this mixture of government support and infrastructure together with entrepreneurship and private enterprise.
Yeah, with China, they had so much growth and so much investment coming in, whether it be from the government investing in infrastructure, but also from a lot of foreign investment, because China was really the place to be for so much of the past few decades for these global multinational businesses. And that's where e-commerce in China kind of arose, right? From these, that's where you had these logistics systems that came about. And then when a company like Pinduoduo came in place, in around 2015, right? They had an environment where they could really just flourish. But in Bangladesh, they're looking at a case like that and they say, well, how do we build that environment? And what they're doing with Xshop seems to be, really just creating that infrastructure so that their own e-commerce environment can grow.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the challenges there around infrastructure, as you said, the size of the market. Bangladesh, as we touched on, it's still a huge market, right?
Yeah.
It's 150 million people, right?
It's massive.
I'm from the UK. It's about 60 million people in the UK. So we're looking, far bigger than my home market, which is not a small market. So the opportunity there is sizable. So perhaps we time for us to focus more on the second interview now. With Ravish, and it's definitely more product focused. We're definitely, he's not from the government sector, right? He's a young entrepreneur, product manager, really smart guy who's got practical experience on the ground as well, right? Like knows China, has used Chinese e-commerce apps himself. And so we're really focusing more about user experience, really, and things like the actual product and also, he's got the thing about the billion users, right? About how that's a little bit cheesy, perhaps. I don't know. We didn't actually use that in the paper ourselves. It's not something that we felt was relevant to the actual China story.
I think what he does identify is that there is a disconnect, I think, from, with the first wave of internet users, you had the Silicon Valley creators and entrepreneurs that were building products for themselves, and they were building products for their parents. Now there's a far bigger disconnect between the people who are building the product, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe they're in Beijing, or maybe they're in Bangalore or in Silicon Valley, and there's a huge disconnect between them and somebody in rural India or Bangladesh.
Yeah, for sure. We're not. Yeah, you're definitely not building products for yourself anymore, and you've got to be in touch with those users and understand that their reality is very different from yours a lot of the time. Yeah, I mean there was that challenge in China. To be honest, a lot of Chinese also struggled to understand Pinduoduo in the early days.
Yeah.
Chinese based in Beijing and Shanghai who were internet industry professionals, but these are high salary, highly educated, really smart people, but they're so far away from the target user, right? So they really didn't get why Pinduoduo could be so successful, even though they're Chinese and obviously they understand everything about the culture. It's just that the reality of their target user, their day-to-day existence is and the psychology behind why they would want to purchase these items is so very far away from these people in Beijing, Shanghai. Our second guest is Ravish Bhatia, who's got his own podcast. He's a product manager and based in India, used to live in China, and so has got some on-the-ground experience. He's also an entrepreneur involved in startups around digitalization of a gold exchange. Actually, it's quite interesting. He'll mention it a little bit at the beginning of his section as well.
Yeah, he has really good insights, I think, on the intersection between India and China's tech space and digital economy. The ways in which, like as we said before, maybe there's some same but some different. That's going on there.
With Rav, it's definitely more product focused. So we're definitely talking about things like user experience. In both conversations, a thing that came up was trust, right? Trust was certainly a key word. And so the psychology behind trusting something that happens on an app will have an effect in the real world in terms of a good arriving at your doorstep. It's a big jump for many people to make. So that's a consistent theme, I think, between both conversations.
Yeah, and something that really stood out to me in both the conversations that we had here, but also in the paper, was about this idea of how to recreate some of these physical spaces in the digital world. So we wrote about in our paper this idea of kind of the digital night market, or like a digital mall that is able to meet a lot of these sort of human needs that traditional e-commerce doesn't. And that's a common theme that goes through each of these, right? So the one reason people like to shop in their own neighborhoods is because of that feeling of community, because of that trust, and because of other things like just ease of use. So how do you meet all of these sort of demands and these needs in order to overcome some of those barriers? And that was just a consistent theme that we've had throughout these conversations.
Sure. All right, without further ado, let's just jump into it. Let's get into our first conversation. So tell us more about what you do, Ravish. Like, what's keeping you busy these days, and like, what are you focusing on?
Yeah, so apart from constantly obsessing about things that don't affect me personally, just generally being a perspective, things in the news and all that's happening around the world, I work as a product manager. So my interests lie in products that are being built for people across the world. But I found my footing here in India, where I was born and raised. And we just launched a new company, which is 5 months old, but we're trying to do something big, raised a seed round, and now we're just working really hard on launching that. I also host a podcast called the Use Case Podcast, which has a decent presence here in India. We reached the top 5 rankings on Apple Podcasts a while ago. We jump in and out, but we've had some very interesting and engaging conversations on the show. So I'll just be selfish enough and plug that in here. But this is
today we'll be focusing mainly on like just this idea of what Pinduoduo's been doing with their sort of interactive e-commerce. Like, that's a whole amazing stuff going on there. That's, and we were able to produce something there that present it in a new way, because there's so much going on, right, that people can barely keep up.
Right. Elle told me a little bit about it, but I'm very curious to see what you guys have come out. And I think it's based on extensive research that some of the best minds have been doing together. So I'm very excited to read it when it comes out.
Yeah, so like basically with the paper, to summarize, like some of the themes that we touched upon, which are relevant for India as well, is like how one of the big things that Pinduoduo managed to do was reach a lot of e-commerce, onboard a lot of e-commerce users for the first time in China, right? So like, and doing that through ways where they're reducing the barriers to partake in e-commerce, right? Because actually, for people like us, it seems really trivial to download an app, right? It seems really trivial to hook up a payment processing thing, like whether that's WeChat Pay, Alipay, whether it's Visa or MasterCard, but to connect that up to an account and then to just buy something on an impulse, not a big deal, right? But it's the first time you're doing it and you're unfamiliar with that, and maybe you're unfamiliar with making a payment on your phone. It's super intimidating, right? And how do we, and it seems really complex. So how do we reach these people? How do we get these people on board and actually using e-commerce? They have a mobile phone now. You know, through Geo in India, like they've got fast and reliable, cheap internet. You know, they're using things like short video and news feeds to consume content. But how do we get them to e-commerce? I think is really one of the big themes that we try to explore.
Right. Matt, I say this with the utmost respect for you, but see, when we say things like these people might find it extremely difficult to, they don't probably understand how well to download an app. That's actually why I have a problem with the word next billion users, the word in itself. We often use terms, and we're so disconnected with this large segment of population sometimes that we don't realize we're being condescending. Like they find it difficult to download, or that they're not used to e-commerce, or there's definitely greater amount of there's a greater threshold that needs to be crossed. But actually, if you look at the number of downloads that have been coming of different apps, they've largely been from tier 2, tier 3 cities, because around 2016, 17, 18, that period of time, the internet growth from these urban cities and urban centers basically began to saturate. So where did all that growth come from? It came from the hinterlands, right, where people were downloading apps. And actually, this is just based on what I've seen for the apps that I've worked on. We've actually seen more downloads from smaller cities than we've seen from larger ones. The fact that they are not transacting enough is a different problem. So then they're downloading the apps more, but they're not necessarily making the purchase more than their urban counterparts are. So the issue is not in terms of understanding whether or not they are able, how this works or what an app is. It's about trust. And as long as we don't necessarily understand the consumer psychology, we can't build products for that audience in a way that gains their trust and suffices their exact needs. So yeah, I say this out loud many times, especially to younger product managers. When you're thinking about building a product for someone, you're supposed to put yourself in their shoes to understand what their intrinsic motivation to use that product is. And you can do that if you shed your biases and notions and hypotheses and just put yourself in their shoes. Yeah. So actually, and that's what the term that we've put as well is the term next billion users. It's as if saying that these users came next after someone, as if they're second to something else. So I often try to, and I've made this effort consciously to shed those biases myself, because only when I'm able to do that, I can build successful products for that audience. So this is something that I say to everyone.
Is to understand the user, right? Is to put yourself in their shoes.
Right.
Totally.
And go ahead.
Oh,
you were thinking something.
I was going to say that's for sure. That's like it is difficult because they're coming from such a different place sometimes.
Right.
In terms of just that we have a lot of baggage around our behaviors and habits and attitudes towards technology that these people who are coming in fresh much earlier in the journey of using internet services in general will have. In some ways it's refreshing, right? You're building new habits, you're building new, you're not held back by the past. But then it brings up new, like you say, trust. I think you're right to identify that one. That's a huge one. We identified that in the paper as being like the motivation to actually use e-commerce, right? To actually have that trust to, when I buy something, it's actually going to arrive.
Right.
And it's not going to look silly.
Right.
And I'm not going to waste my money.
Yeah.
These are all like actually very serious psychological concerns that people will have to make that jump.
Bang on, 100%. Very true. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think in many ways, a lot of products out there in the market have solved for that. to some extent, that is why we are seeing the kind of business models that have emerged now. We're seeing increased activity in the hinterlands, areas that did not see participation before in different means and forms, actually. So I think there's definitely a wave in that direction. There has been a wave in that direction, but we still don't understand that 100%. So there's still a big portion of that market that can just be tapped by going from downloads to purchase. So say if you have 100 downloads in amongst these users, and out of them just 20 have made a purchase, there's still an opportunity to tap the remaining 80 that lies ahead. And that can be tapped if we build that trust, and it's a slow process. I'm actually curious if you discovered any interesting ways in which Pinduoduo or somebody else was able to build that trust in your paper.
Yeah, so it's been well documented, right, about the sort of social aspect, the group team purchase mechanism that they used, especially in the early days, to drive the hyper growth of the platform. And so that actually mechanism of recruiting socially through your circles, onboarding new users, acquiring new users through social platforms, actually goes a long way to solving also these issues we're talking about, right? Because it's actually someone you know who is introducing the platform for you and might be talking you through that onboarding process. And then there also the motivation there. We're switching it from one where you're afraid to look silly if something goes wrong and you don't know how to solve it, into a psychological situation where you've got this sort of fear of missing out because your friends are getting this deal, and then you want to be part of the inner circle there and also share in that purchase to get that, and that bonding experience around that behavior. So it sort of switches the dynamics quite a lot. And so I think in the early days that was quite a powerful mechanism that they used in order to. We know they used it to acquire users, but it also switched the dynamics of behavior there around, from one of like, I'm scared of this and something might go wrong, into being like, I don't want to miss out.
Right. So I think you mentioned a very important point, which is that of comfort. And when that level of comfort arises, that's when you usually hit product market fit. And it seems Pinduoduo was able to do that. Right.
Yeah. How are we seeing this play out in India? Like, is there any sort of useful touch points here in terms of similar services and how they're trying to solve these kind of problems?
Yeah. So in many ways, people like to, and it's natural to draw parallels between India and China, given the large population sizes. So when you talk about the term next billion users, where would you find billion users? It's India or China mostly, right? Or Africa as a continent. But no other country will have as many users to go. No other country would have a next version of billion users to reach out to than these two giants. But just by the nature of being such a large consumer base, there are so many differences, not just between India and China, but also within this user base, right? So there are demographic differences. For example, women behave much differently than men. Men tend to download more apps, usually in India at least. I don't know about China. They download more apps. They tend to browse a lot. Women, it's harder for apps to get the trust of women and make them purchase. Usually women don't necessarily have the same backing to make those transactions. For example, not all women own a debit card or have a bank account that they can easily link to their payment app and make a transaction. So they usually see fewer transactions. Women tend to use their husbands or their sons, especially married women above the age of 30s. They tend to use their husbands or their children's phones to make transactions. So sometimes you get the data wherein you see a lot of young people are downloading and buying products that say women above a certain age would buy. For example, menstrual pads. Okay, a 15 to 20-year-old is probably not buying it for himself, right? He's probably buying it for his mother or sister or wife or somebody else. Could be anyone. But so there are these demographic trends and there are regional differences within this large base that we've sort of homogenized and call it into one single term. So with respect to the amount of differences within this segment, there are so many that it's often hard to make a apples to apple comparison with China. But having said that, I think in terms of just pure directional trends, we're seeing stuff play out in India, which did have its roots in China. For example, a couple of apps like SimSim and others did try to copy, quote unquote, Pinduoduo's model, but they have not largely been successful because of some other issues in the real economy. So the digital economy is what we most often refer to when we talk about next billion users coming online and making transactions in e-commerce. But the efficacy of the system is going to be zero if it's not properly tied in with the real economy. So the logistics needs to be in place for this model to become a success. The highways and the roads need to be in place for, say, a delivery to happen in the next 7 days. Now, think about this. If a user does not like the product and wants to return it, there's a time period, there's a 7-day time period in which the user needs to return that product. But if, say, a delivery guy cannot even come to this person's place within 7 days to take back that refund, how's that even going to happen? That's not, and therefore, the trust is not going to be built, the comfort is not going to exist, and there are going to be severe issues in the real economy that we often miss out in the noise that surrounds the digital economy. So we have a tendency to think that everything is nice and hearty because we're seeing so many downloads, quote unquote, or monthly active users from these regions. But if it's not necessarily tied to the real economy well enough, then there are fails. So that's what happened in India, which I think is a much better situation in China because the roads and the infrastructure is much better. So a few models that work for next billion users in China did work in India. For example, TikTok, that is not tied to the real economy. But those like Pinduoduo that were tied to the real economy and needed something else to be in place did not work as well, is what I think. And that's just like a broad generalization of what I feel exists.
So that's the number one issue by far is the logistics infrastructure, essentially, is what you're saying.
Right.
Makes sense. Yeah, we did point that out in the paper as well. I think the Pinduoduo strategy team were talking about that, saying that was one of the foundational infrastructures that needed to be in place in order to make the model work, was this just sort of logistics infrastructure and also manufacturing infrastructure, because for them, the C2M model is also quite important, right? So they're able to work with, there's so much manufacturing, there's so many factories in China that they're sort of spoiled for choice to work with these partners. And also a lot of these factories are looking to build their own brands and also to target, whereas maybe before they've been mostly export, they were looking to address the internal China market itself more and build their brand and distribute more locally. So that fit really well with the platform as well. Interesting you mentioned, TikTok. I totally get it, right? Like it's an online, totally digital service, right? So it's services can scale fast, not held back by the real world. One of the things we picked out in the paper is actually there's a kind of similarity actually in the model between the mobile first e-commerce of Pinduoduo and then with TikTok, in that they're both recommendation driven, in that the e-commerce experience is for Pinduoduo, it's not search driven, right? It's not intent driven. Right. So that was something for us that was pretty interesting when we dug in to find out that we didn't, at the beginning, we didn't think that was such a big part of the model. Turns out it was really important.
Do you think, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. Do you think that a lot of the business models that are usually targeted towards next billion users, or NBUs, as I like to not call them.
You need an alternative, Ravish. You need to come up with a different term, right?
I know.
Otherwise, people are going to keep using that.
Yeah.
We didn't use that in the paper, though. I don't think we used that term.
Should we brainstorm something right here, right now? Okay. We're just gonna call them the other billion users. No, I don't like the word other as well. Anyway, what was I saying? So it seems to me that a lot of the models that have been targeted specifically towards next billion users are those that have been are business models that rely on massive amounts of data, because at the time when these models are usually scaling up, the capacity to pay is usually lower in this consumer segment. So the only thing that they can monetize is the user's data. And so a lot of the business models that emerged have been those based on monetizing user data, which is very different from, say, the e-commerce of 2008, 2009, when business models were emerging were very transaction heavy. So they were search based. You go to the whatever Amazon used to look like back in 2008. You type a specific thing. You would browse through particular products, but you went there with an intent to buy, or you came upon them when you were searching for something to buy. So it was a search-driven business model where the amount of data that you required was not necessarily successful to your end goal, which was to make a sale. But in the new business models, and I'll use a term that you do not like to use, social e-commerce, they're very display-driven. And display-driven business models usually work when there's a lot of data backed by them. So again, a large amount of internet, so much data, they can build algorithms. It is now possible to build algorithms that would show you something that you are likely to buy without you necessarily expressing an intent to buy. That is one major difference that I think e-commerce of 2008 differs from e-commerce of 2020. And then it raises other issues as well, that of privacy and the fact that a lot of people think that the next billion users are not bothered about their privacy. Again, the condescending attitude that we like to have, which I think is a bit mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's also, I feel that's a simplification.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you're using quite similar language to how Pinduoduo phrase it themselves, right? So it's search. They contrast their algorithmic recommendation model with intent-driven search, right? And how they talk a lot about how mobile, mobile is not very search-friendly, essentially. On a desktop where we're recording right now, you've got a keyboard in front of you, you've got a mouse. You can use these to give very accurate input, and it's a very natural way. On a phone, especially today now the screens are a bit better, they're a bit bigger, they're a bit higher resolution. But when Pinduoduo was taking off in 2016, let's say, still a lot of Android devices in the China market, the screens were not that large, and you had this really sort of very small thing to look at, and feed where you can actually infer the user's preferences through a recommendation engine, rather than them actually inputting, which involves them like tapping on the screen, having lots of touches. It's just a lot more friction there. Especially with these, a lot of these lower tier users, they want a very easy, accessible e-commerce experience, or if it's entertainment, like TikTok, and entertainment experience is very accessible and requires the sort of minimum amount of effort, I guess you could say, right, for them to actually.
But if you've used any Chinese e-commerce app, which I know you have, you know how much information is put on a screen on a Chinese app. So
yeah, I mean, they can be very busy and lively, loud. There's an entertainment element as well, for sure.
Yeah. I don't think so. That's one difference, I think, with respect to apps built in India. There's a lot of information usually, but Indian users are not used to seeing so much information thrown at you. I don't know whether it's because when you translate into different languages, it becomes a lot, or the fact that Chinese is able to accommodate more information, or just that's a general trend. I don't know why. You could probably tell me more about it. But if you look at apps anywhere outside of China, they're usually not that cluttered and they don't have that much cognitive load in them. So I think
Yeah.
Pinduoduo and some of the social commerce apps definitely solve for the amount of cognitive load that we would put on the user. So you could just easily be scrolling through your phone, and as Pyle Arora, the anthropologist, coined this term in her book on Next Billion Users, that uh, the business models are largely to do with the leisure economy. So the internet is the leisure economy for these users. And so they can scroll through it without necessarily having to read or apply 100% cognitive load on the screen at any given point of time.
Yeah, it makes me okay. So there's tons of stuff we touched upon there, actually. Yeah, what you mentioned about China, I got the sense that it's not totally unique. I feel there's certainly some. I've read some things and seen some things from Japan and like South Korea that also bear some elements. So there may be something there with characters and sort of just East Asian
Okay.
ways of information expectations around that. I'm not sure.
I've never used those, so I don't know. I could completely be wrong. Yeah, but it's totally possible. I've just used Chinese apps. I know this because ordering lunch every day was a bit of a struggle for me when I was using Alama back in Beijing.
Right,
Right,
right.
right.
Yeah, but you're right to point out that in general, e-commerce, whether it's Taobao or JD or Pinduoduo or VIP, whatever, they're all pretty busy interfaces. Yeah, for
Right.
sure. Like if people want to find you online, and
Mhm.
where should they follow you and find out, and follow your stuff and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Are you going to ask, or should I just say it and you can edit it out?
Yeah. Just say it, and we'll edit this together.
Okay. Well, great, Matt. I think this was a great conversation as well. And I'm really excited to read what you and Elle and the team have put together. And especially because, as you can clearly see, I don't know enough about Pinduoduo. And I'm very curious to see if that model worked. One day, maybe I can copy China models here in India and raise some money and build a better e-commerce. But yeah, until then, I'll be working on my podcast, which you could find on all podcasting apps. It's called the Use Case Podcast, which largely cover the world around startups and VCs and product here in India. You could find me on Twitter if you want to DM me and ask me questions or anything else. My handle is RAVBHATIA. That's Rav Bhatia. I don't know why I use that handle, but I do. So there that is.
All right. So there we go. We've had our two conversations. I have two very different people that we spoke to in terms of their viewpoints and their experience and what how they're looking at this. We could definitely do more. I feel like there's so much to unpack here around this topic, and maybe we will in the future. Who knows? Let us know how you feel about this. Leave a comment, etc., and reach out to us directly. We do hope to be doing more around this area in the future.